The old mansion stood at the top of the hill like a silent judge watching over everything around it. For years, people in the town had spoken about it with a mixture of respect and fear. It was huge, too huge for any one person to manage, with long hallways that seemed to echo even when no one was walking through them, windows so tall they made the rooms feel like small museums, and staircases that felt endless. People said the place had a soul of its own, and that it tested anyone who tried to care for it. Maybe that was why every maid who ever worked there left before long. Some lasted weeks, some only days, and a few packed their things before the first week was even over. The work was hard, the rules were strict, and the atmosphere of the mansion was heavier than the walls themselves. The family who lived there was respectful but demanding. They were old-fashioned people who believed that everything must be kept in perfect form. Dust should never be visible. Floors should always shine. Beds should be made so neatly you could bounce a coin off them. And the grandmother, the elder of the household, was known for noticing even a tiny wrinkle in a blanket or a small smudge on the edge of a window. People around town whispered that the mansion was cursed. Not in a dark way, but in a way that made people feel like no matter how hard they worked, it was never enough. The stories grew with time, and soon the mansion became a place no one wanted to work in. Job seekers avoided it. Experienced maids rejected the offer even when they needed the money. The reputation was enough to scare anyone. Inside the house, the family was struggling. Without a steady maid, the chores piled up. The large rooms became dusty, the curtains looked dull, and the wooden floor lost the shine it once had. The grandmother sat in her favorite chair near the window, shaking her head every day as she saw things fall apart around her. She was too old to clean, too weak to climb stairs, and too used to a certain order in life. One morning, while the family sat in the dining room eating breakfast in near silence, the conversation once again turned to the question that had no answer. How would they manage without help? The father rubbed his temples and said he had already spoken to agencies in the city, but none of them were willing to send anyone. The mother sighed, knowing they were running out of options. The grandmother looked at the dull floor and whispered softly that she had never seen the mansion in this condition. For the family, the mansion was not just a house. It was history. Their ancestors had lived there for generations, and every brick held a memory. Losing control of the house felt like losing a piece of their identity. They needed help, someone who would stay. Someone who would understand the mansion instead of running from it. That same afternoon, a young woman walked through the front gate with steady steps. She looked around as she approached the main door, her eyes following the height of the building. She wasn't intimidated, even though most people would be. She had heard the stories, but did not let them fill her mind with fear. She simply told herself that a job was a job. Work was something she had always known how to do. She pressed the doorbell, and the sound echoed through the mansion like a forgotten melody. The mother opened the door and looked at the young woman with surprise. Few people ever came willingly to ask for work there anymore. The young woman introduced herself politely, said she had heard there was an open maid position. The mother glanced at the father, who approached with caution, almost as if he expected the girl to change her mind halfway through the conversation. But she didn't. She stood still, confident. Even though she looked tired and carried a simple cloth bag on her shoulder, they invited her inside. She followed quietly. Noticing the size of the hallway, the grand staircase, and the dim light that filtered in through the tall windows. The mansion felt like a place that had stories hidden in every corner. It was old but beautiful, and she felt something inside her settle, as if the place was calling her instead of scaring her. The father was honest as he explained the situation. He told her that many maids had come before her, but the work was difficult, and none of them stayed. He did not want to hide the truth, only to lose another worker in a few days. The young woman listened without interrupting. Her expression didn't change. When he finished, she nodded and said softly that she was used to hard work. She said she needed the job, but that wasn't the only reason she wanted it. She wanted stability, and she believed she could do well if she was given the chance. The grandmother, who had been resting in the parlor nearby, slowly came out and studied the girl with sharp eyes. The young woman looked back with calm respect. Something about the girl's presence made the grandmother raise her eyebrow with interest. She asked the girl why she wasn't scared like the others. The young woman smiled a little and simply said that fear never helped anyone. Finish their work. The mother and father exchanged a look. Something in them softened. They decided to give her a trial period, just a few days to see if she could manage. The girl accepted happily, and they showed her to the small room where she would stay. It was simple but clean, with a tiny window that looked out onto the back garden. The next morning, she woke before the sun rose. She opened her window, letting the cool air in, and took a deep breath. She was nervous, but she refused to let it show. She tied her hair back, washed her face, and stepped into the long hallway where the day's work waited for her. Her first task was cleaning the main hall. She swept the floor, wiped down the tables, and dusted the corners. But the mansion was much larger than she had expected. Every time she thought she was done with one section, she noticed another set of shelves or another window that needed cleaning. By the time the family came downstairs for breakfast, she was still working. The grandmother watched silently as she moved with careful attention. Not rushing, not complaining, just doing the work with steady hands. She didn't clean perfectly on the first day. A few spots were missed and the grandmother pointed them out. The young woman nodded respectfully and corrected them. She didn't take offense, which surprised everyone. After breakfast, she moved to the dining room, then the kitchen, then the upstairs hallway. The mansion seemed to grow larger the more she cleaned. She could feel her legs getting tired, her back aching, and her arms heavy. But she kept going. She told herself that quitting would not solve anything. She had made a promise to herself the moment she accepted the job that she would try her hardest. By late afternoon, her face was flushed and her hands were rough from constant scrubbing. She found a moment to sit on the staircase and rest. As she sat there, she looked around and noticed how the sunlight fell across the walls, how the dust floated like tiny stars in the air. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt a strange sense of calm. She knew the mansion needed help, and she knew she needed the job. Maybe that was why she felt connected to the place. Already, the grandmother came down the hallway and saw her sitting there. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, she slowly walked toward her and sat beside her, though sitting wasn't easy at her age. The girl straightened up, feeling embarrassed that she was resting. But the grandmother surprised her. She said it was all right to sit for a moment. She said the mansion was not an easy place, and no one expected her to be made of stone. The girl smiled softly, grateful for the kindness. She asked the grandmother how long she had lived there. And that was when the grandmother's eyes softened. The grandmother told her stories of the mansion, how it was once filled with children running in the hallways, how celebrations were held in the dining room, how the garden sparkled with flowers in the spring. She spoke about the traditions her family valued and why maintaining the mansion mattered so much. It wasn't about perfection. It was about honoring the generations before them. The young woman listened carefully. Every word made her understand the place better. She realized that the work was not just about cleaning. It was about caring for something old, meaningful, and full of memories. She felt something warm spread through her chest, sense of purpose she had not felt in a long time. When the grandmother finished speaking, the girl nodded and promised she would do her best. And she meant it. She stood up, feeling a new strength inside her, and continued her work. The rest of the day went on with the same rhythm, cleaning, organizing, learning the routines, and adjusting to the mansion's demands. By the time she finally returned to her small room that night, she was exhausted. She lay on the bed and closed her eyes, but even in her tiredness, she felt content. She had made it through her first day, something many others couldn't say. As she drifted off to sleep, she didn't know what challenges the next days would bring. She didn't know how many mistakes she would make or how overwhelming the tasks would become. She didn't know that she would soon feel like giving up. But she also didn't know that something inside her would keep pushing her forward. Something stronger than fear or exhaustion. For now, all she knew was that she had been given a chance to prove herself, a chance to help a family in need, and a chance to bring life back into a mansion that had almost been forgotten. And she was ready to try, no matter how difficult the path ahead would be. The sun had barely risen when the young woman woke up on her second day in the mansion. Her body felt heavier than usual, as if the long corridors and endless rooms from the day before had left their weight on her shoulders. Still, she pushed herself up, washed her face, and tied her hair back, with quiet determination. She reminded herself that she had made it through the first day. That alone was something to be proud of. When she stepped into the hallway, the morning light was just beginning to touch the wooden floors. The house felt different at that hour. Quiet, gentle, as if it had not yet decided what kind of day it would be. She took a deep breath and walked toward the kitchen, knowing the family would wake soon and expect breakfast to be ready. She had cooked for others before, but cooking in a mansion kitchen was another kind of challenge. Pots hung from high hooks, some too heavy for her to lift comfortably. Shelves were filled with spices she didn't recognize. The stove was old but powerful, and the oven fired up with a loud sound that startled her each time. Still, she moved around the kitchen carefully, trying to learn everything by observing rather than guessing. She placed the kettle on the stove and began preparing the simple breakfast the mother had requested the night before. Every now and then she had to stop and check a recipe book she found tucked inside a drawer. She didn't want to mess anything up. The grandmother, who had a sensitive palate, would definitely notice. By the time the family filed into the dining room, she had laid out the dishes with care. She stood to the side, watching them scan the table. The mother gave her a small nod of approval, something so subtle that anyone else might have missed it. The father tasted the tea and hummed quietly, a good sign. The grandmother was the slowest to react. She took a bite, paused for several seconds, then continued eating. That was her version of saying everything was fine. While they ate, the young woman returned to the kitchen to begin cleaning. She washed the dishes, wiped the counters, and swept the floor. Her hands moved steadily, but her mind wandered. She wondered how long she would be able to keep up with everything. She wondered if the family trusted her yet, or if they still thought she might quit at any moment like the others. After breakfast, her main tasks for the day were explained to her. She needed to clean the upstairs rooms, polish the wooden railing on the staircase, and wash the curtains in the 2 guest rooms. None of the tasks were unfamiliar, but the size of the mansion made everything take twice as long. There were so many hallways, so many corners, so many tiny details to notice. As she climbed the stairs with her cleaning supplies, she felt the weight of the day settling on her. The second floor was even larger than she remembered. Doors lined both sides of the hallway, and each room had its own character. Some rooms were decorated with old paintings. Others had heavy furniture that hadn't been moved in years. Dust had gathered on the frames, the shelves, and even the lampshades. She started with the first guest room, opening the windows to let in fresh air. The curtains were thick and hard to remove, and she struggled with them until she finally managed to pull them down. She folded them and carried them downstairs to wash, feeling the strain in her arms. She told herself it was all right to take things one step at a time. She didn't need to prove her strength to anyone. Once the curtains were in the wash, she returned to the guest room. She dusted the shelves, wiped the windows, and cleaned the floor. She tried different ways of working, starting from the top and moving downward, or focusing on one corner at a time, but no matter what she did, it felt like the room kept adding more things to clean. It was as if the mansion had a never-ending list of tasks hidden in its walls. By midday, sweat clung to her forehead, and her hands were dry from constant scrubbing. She paused to drink water and sat on the edge of the bed in the second guest room. As she rested, she heard faint footsteps in the hallway. When she stood up and looked outside, she saw the grandmother slowly walking with her cane. The grandmother noticed her watching and called her closer. The young woman walked over carefully, unsure whether she was being scolded or asked for help. Instead, the grandmother simply asked, in her soft voice, "Are you managing?" The girl answered honestly. She said it was difficult, but she was doing her best. The grandmother nodded, staring down the hallway, as if remembering something far away. She told the young woman that the mansion had always required patience. She explained that the house was old and full of history. Every maid who had worked there before had tried to fight the work instead of understanding the place. "The house is not meant to be rushed," the grandmother said. "It demands time. If you give it that, it gives you peace in return." The young woman listened closely. She wasn't used to anyone taking a moment to explain things gently to her. It made her feel strangely warm inside. She thanked the grandmother, and the older woman moved on slowly, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Her work continued for hours. She washed the curtains, ironed them carefully, and hung them back in place. She polished the railing, making sure it gleamed from top to bottom. She dusted frames, wiped windows, straightened furniture, and kept checking her list to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything. Every once in a while, she glanced outside. The garden looked peaceful, with sunlight resting on the grass. Birds perched on branches, and for a moment, she wished she could sit outside and rest. But she reminded herself that there was still more to do in the late afternoon. The father walked by and paused at the top of the stairs. He watched silently as she polished the railing. She didn't notice him at first, but when she did, she stood up straight and greeted him politely. He didn't say much, only nodded and walked on. But his expression held a glimmer of approval. As the day stretched on, she became more tired. Her arms ached from lifting, her feet hurt from walking back and forth, and her back felt tight from bending over all day. But even with all that, she didn't think about quitting. She reminded herself of why she had come to build stability, to support herself, to give life a direction. By early evening, her tasks were finally done. She walked back to the kitchen to finish the last bit of cleaning. As she washed the final dish, the mother entered quietly. She didn't interrupt the girl's work. She simply watched for a moment, observing how calmly and neatly she moved. When the girl finished, the mother thanked her. It was the first time she had spoken those words since the girl arrived. It wasn't dramatic or emotional, but it came from a place of genuine appreciation. The girl bowed her head slightly and said it was her job, but inside, she felt a small spark of confidence. After finishing her duties, she returned to her room upstairs. Her legs felt heavy as she climbed the stairs, but a sense of accomplishment followed her to the doorway. She sat on her bed, took off her shoes, and stretched her tired hands. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was clear. She thought about the grandmother's words, about the way the family had begun to soften toward her, and about how she was slowly understanding the rhythm of the mansion. It wasn't about speed. It wasn't about perfection. It was about learning the house, respecting its pace, doing each task with sincerity. As night settled over the mansion, she lay down and let her eyes close. The faint sounds of the old building, the soft ticking of a distant clock, the creak of wooden beams settling, the gentle whisper of wind against the windows felt comforting. She felt like the house was finally beginning to accept her. And though she didn't know what challenges the next day would bring, she believed she could face them. She wasn't working just for a paycheck anymore. She was working because something inside her wanted to see the mansion shine again, to bring back the warmth it once held. Little did she know that the days ahead would test her patience even more. She would stumble, she would doubt herself, and there would be moments when she would question whether she belonged there at all. But she would also find new strength, new courage, and a sense of belonging she never expected. For now, she drifted into sleep, with the quiet hope that tomorrow would bring her one step closer to proving to the mansion, and to herself that she was not like the others who left. She was determined to stay, no matter how hard the work became. The third day in the mansion started differently for the young woman. She woke up with a heaviness she had not felt before, as if the exhaustion of the last 2 days had finally caught up with her. Her arms felt weak when she lifted them, her legs ached when her feet touched the floor, and even opening her eyes took more effort than she expected. Still, she pushed herself up and stood in front of the small mirror on the wall. For a moment, she stared at her reflection. There were faint shadows under her eyes and a tiredness she couldn't hide. She wondered whether the previous maids had felt the same way on their third day, whether this was the point where doubt began to creep in. But she reminded herself why she came. She needed the job. She needed stability. She needed to prove to herself that she was stronger than her fears. She washed her face, tied her hair back, and stepped out into the hallway. The mansion was quiet, as always at that hour. It almost felt like the house was asleep, holding its breath before the day began. She walked to the kitchen, hoping that starting early would help her get ahead of the long list of tasks waiting for her. The morning routine went smoothly at first. She prepared breakfast with steady hands, though she moved a little slower than the day before. She made sure the tea was warm, the bread toasted, and the table set neatly. The family came down one by one, offering small nods that told her she had done well. But even with the quiet approval, she felt a strange heaviness in her chest. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't fear. It was something more complicated, a mixture of pressure, hope, and the silent fear of failing. After breakfast, Mother handed her a new set of tasks. Today she was expected to clean the study room, organize the library shelves, wash the floors of the main hall, and polish the silverware in the dining room. The list felt long, but she nodded politely and didn't complain. She decided to start with the study room, a place she hadn't entered yet. When she opened the door, she was surprised by how warm it felt. The room was filled with books, old papers, and wooden furniture. The desk near the window had a thin layer of dust. The shelves were crowded with items that looked untouched for years. She opened the windows to let in fresh air and dusted the shelves one by one. She wiped the desk, cleaned the corners, and swept the floor. But as she worked, she realized that the room held pieces of the family's past photo frames, notebooks, letters. She didn't touch anything personal. She couldn't help noticing how much history the room carried while cleaning the top shelf. She accidentally dropped a stack of old papers. They scattered across the floor like dry leaves. Her heart jumped in panic. She knelt down quickly and gathered them, trying not to crease anything. But as she held the papers in her hands, the father walked in. He saw her on the floor with the papers and sighed softly. For a moment she thought he was upset. She opened her mouth to explain, but he shook his head gently. Instead of scolding her, he told her that the papers were not important and that accidents happened. His voice was calm, not angry, and that surprised her. She bowed her head apologetically, and he told her to continue her work without worrying. Then he left the room quietly. His reaction made her feel relieved, but also more determined to be careful. Once the study room was done, she moved on to the library. This was not an easy task. The library was large, with tall shelves filled from top to bottom. She needed a ladder to reach the higher shelves, and every time she climbed up, her legs trembled from tiredness. But she pushed through, taking breaks when she needed to. She wiped each book gently, dusted the shelves, and straightened the rows. She lost track of time as she worked, the quiet atmosphere making her forget the world outside the room. But by the time she finished half the library, her arms felt numb and her fingers burned from constantly dusting. She stepped back, stretching her sore muscles, and realized she still had the main hall and the silverware left. The day felt endless already, but she knew quitting halfway wasn't an option. She moved to the main hall next. The floor needed washing, which meant filling buckets with water, carrying them across the large space, scrubbing every inch, and drying it all afterward. Her back hurt as she worked, and at one point she dropped a bucket because her grip weakened. Water spilled across the floor. She closed her eyes in frustration. But instead of letting the mistake upset her, she grabbed a cloth and cleaned up the mess. She told herself that frustration wouldn't make the floor clean. Only patience would. Hours passed. Her clothes were damp, her hands wrinkled from water, and her feet sore. The mansion felt bigger than ever, as if it was testing her limits. In the late afternoon, as the sun started shining through the tall windows, the grandmother walked into the hall with her cane. The young woman didn't notice her at first because she was focused on wringing out a wet cloth. The grandmother approached slowly and asked her how she was feeling. For a moment, the girl didn't know what to say. Should she admit she was tired? Should she pretend everything was fine? She chose honesty. She said she was very tired and that the work was harder than she had expected. She said she wanted to do well but sometimes felt she was falling behind. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. It's not from fear, but from the weight of her emotions. The grandmother listened patiently. She didn't interrupt or correct her. When the young woman finished speaking, the grandmother placed her hand gently on her arm. Every person who walked through these halls felt the same. The grandmother said softly, "Even I felt overwhelmed when I was young. This house asks for a lot, but it gives a lot too. Do not measure yourself by how fast you work. Measure yourself by how sincere your effort is. Those words touched something inside the young woman. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, as if the grandmother's voice had reached a place she had kept hidden from herself. She nodded, feeling a little lighter. The grandmother stayed with her for a few minutes, keeping her company while she worked. It was a simple gesture, but it gave her strength. When the grandmother left, she felt calmer and more focused. After finishing the main hall, she went to the dining room to polish the silverware. There were many pieces: spoons, forks, knives, serving utensils, and each one needed to shine. She sat at the table and worked quietly, her fingers moving slowly but carefully. As she polished, she thought about the grandmother's words. She realized she had been trying to prove her strength by working faster than her body could handle. She needed to change her approach. She needed to find a rhythm that allowed her to work with care, not pressure. By the time she finished the silverware, it was late evening. The girl cleaned up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The mother was there preparing tea. She looked up and offered the girl a warm smile. Without saying much, the mother poured an extra cup and handed it to her. The young woman accepted it with grateful hands. They stood quietly, sharing a moment of peace. After finishing her tea, the girl returned to her room. She changed out of her work clothes and sat on her bed. Her muscles ached, but her heart felt more steady. She realized that even though the day had been difficult, she had not broken. She had stumbled, yes. She had doubted herself, yes. But she had kept going. She thought about how each day in the mansion was teaching her something new, not just about cleaning or organizing, but about patience, humility, and resilience. She understood now why so many had left. The mansion didn't demand strength. It demanded heart. She lay down, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. She wondered what challenges the next day would bring. She wondered whether she would ever feel confident in her work. But she also knew that she was growing, slowly but surely. As sleep finally settled over her, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would not give up. She would learn, adapt, and keep trying. The mansion was not her enemy. It was a test of her courage, a place that could shape her into someone stronger. She had survived the hardest days so far. And though she knew the journey ahead was still long, she felt something she hadn't felt before, a sense of belonging, fragile but real, in the silence of the mansion night. She fell asleep believing that tomorrow would not break her. Tomorrow, she would rise again and continue proving that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. The morning after the storm felt strangely calm around the mansion. The sky was clear, the air smelled fresh, and the sun shone softly on the long driveway. But inside, everything felt different. It was as if the storm had wiped away the last bit of fear that had held the staff back for years. And most importantly, something had changed in the owner too. The house still felt heavy, but not as cold as before. Something unseen had shifted, and everyone sensed it. The workers gathered slowly in the kitchen for breakfast. Most of them looked tired, but they also smiled more than usual. Even though they didn't completely understand what had happened the night before, they all felt thankful for the way it had ended. The owner hadn't shouted at anyone. In fact, he had apologized. That was something none of them had ever imagined. One of the older workers whispered to the others as they sat around the long wooden table. He had worked in many places before, but he said he had never seen a mansion like this, beautiful on the outside, but full of broken pieces on the inside. The others nodded quietly. They knew that if anyone could repair those broken pieces, it was the new maid who stood quietly by the counter, checking if everyone had enough tea. She didn't say much that morning. She kept moving, making sure everything was in order, the way she always did. But there was a new calmness in her face. Even though she had stayed up almost the whole night helping the owner and making sure he was safe, she didn't look exhausted. Instead, she looked hopeful. When the breakfast dishes were almost cleared, the head groundskeeper came in with a message. The owner wanted to speak with the staff again. This time, no one felt nervous. They looked at each other and stood up and walked together toward the main hall. The hall was warm with sunlight coming through the tall windows. The owner stood near the big staircase, his hands behind his back. He looked different, less rigid, more human. He cleared his throat gently when the staff entered. His voice didn't carry the usual sharpness. Instead, it was soft. It's almost careful. He thanked them for their hard work the night before and admitted that he had been wrong in many ways. He said he had allowed the mansion to become a place of fear instead of comfort. He didn't go into details about his past or his struggles, but everyone could tell that he was trying. And for many of them, that was enough. He also said something surprising. He wanted everyone's ideas on how to make life inside the mansion better, not orders ideas. The workers exchanged glances because no owner had ever spoken to them like that. One by one, they began to share small suggestions. Better schedules. More help during busy weeks. Time off. Clear communication. Fair rules. He listened to every single thing they said. The new maid stayed in the back and didn't speak at all. She didn't want attention or praise. She preferred to let the others talk. But the owner looked at her near the end of the meeting and gave her a small nod, almost like a silent thank you. She lowered her eyes politely, not wanting others to feel uncomfortable. When the meeting ended, staff returned to their duties with a kind of energy that the mansion hadn't felt in years. They laughed more, moved faster, and worked with less fear. The mansion itself seemed to respond. The long hallways felt brighter. The furniture didn't feel as dusty, even though it was. The windows seemed to glow more than usual. Later that day, the owner asked the new maid to come to his office. He didn't want to make her nervous, so he kept his tone gentle. He told her he appreciated what she had done the night before, that he knew she had seen his weakest moment, and that most people would have walked away. But she didn't. She told him in her calm voice that everyone goes through difficult times. She said the mansion could become a beautiful place if people worked together with kindness. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that reached him deeply. For the first time in years, the owner felt like he wasn't carrying everything alone. After their talk, the maid returned to her room to rest. She had barely slept the night before, and her body finally demanded a break. She lay on her small bed, closed her eyes, and let herself breathe. She wasn't thinking about praise or rewards. She wasn't thinking about changing the mansion. She was simply thinking about doing her work the best she could, same way she always had. Over the next few days, the changes in the mansion continued, slowly but steadily. The owner began joining the staff for lunch sometimes, just sitting at the end of the table without asking for special treatment. The workers were shy at first, but soon they relaxed when they saw he wasn't judging them. Some evenings, he walked around the mansion grounds checking on things not as a master, but as someone who cared about the place. He talked to the gardeners, asked about the plants, and even helped move heavy pots when needed. The staff noticed that the new maid never acted differently, even though she had helped bring about these changes. She didn't show off. She didn't take credit. She simply continued working with the same dedication and quiet strength. That made people admire her even more. Some of the workers began coming to her for advice when they felt stressed or confused. She didn't pretend to know everything, but she listened. And sometimes that was enough. The mansion began to feel alive again. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived for the owner. It looked official, sealed with a stamp that made it look important. The staff didn't know what was inside, but the moment the owner opened it, his expression changed. Not with anger, not with fear, but with a kind of seriousness that made him think deeply. The maid saw him standing in the hallway with the letter in his hand. He didn't say anything at first, but she sensed something was bothering him. He asked her to walk with him outside to the garden, where the air was quiet and the flowers swayed gently in the breeze. He told her that the letter contained news about the mansion news that could change everything in the coming weeks. He didn't give details yet, but he said he would need help, not in the form of labor, but in the form of support, honesty, and clear thinking. She nodded calmly, telling him she would do what she could. The owner seemed relieved. For the first time, he shared something personal. He said the mansion had once belonged to his family for generations, but now there were matters that threatened that history. He didn't want the staff to worry yet, but he said they deserved to know soon. The maid listened carefully. She didn't offer empty words. She simply said she believed things could be worked out if handled with patience and fairness. Her tone was gentle, and yet somehow it gave him strength. That evening, he called another meeting. The staff gathered again, some nervous, others curious. He told them the mansion was facing an important decision. There were people who wanted to buy the land for a large project that would erase the building entirely. He also said they had a limited amount of time to show that the mansion was worth keeping. At first, panic spread across the room. Some of the workers gasped. Others whispered anxiously. This place wasn't just where they worked, it had become a home for many of them. Losing it would mean losing stability, but then the maid stood quietly and spoke for the first time in the meeting. She said that the mansion had survived storms, before real storms, emotional storms, and now this challenge. She said that if everyone worked together, even small improvements could make a big difference. She said that unity could make the place shine the way it once had. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried hope. The owner watched her with gratitude. Her words lifted the fear in the room just enough for the others to breathe again. The staff spent the rest of the evening discussing ideas. How to restore the old rooms. How to fix the garden. How to make the place feel alive for visitors who might come to evaluate it. People who usually avoided responsibility suddenly took initiative. People who rarely spoke began offering creative suggestions. It was the first time the mansion felt like a true community. Over the next days, the work intensified. The walls were cleaned, the chandeliers washed, the floors polished. The garden was trimmed, and broken benches were repaired. The kitchen staff prepared new recipes to serve during upcoming inspections. The indoor staff worked long hours, but they didn't complain. There were moments of tiredness, but also moments of laughter. And in the center of it all was the maid, working with steady hands, calming voices, and a heart full of quiet determination. The owner often watched her from a distance, amazed by her willpower. She never asked for anything, yet she gave everything she had. She became the bridge between the staff and the mansion, a silent guide that kept everyone balanced. One evening, when the work for the day was done, she walked through the long hallway alone. The lights reflected on the newly polished floors, creating soft glows around her. She ran her fingers lightly across the wooden railings that had once looked dull and dusty. Now they felt alive under her touch. For the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself to smile. She had no idea what the future held. She didn't know whether the mansion would survive the coming tests, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt that she belonged. And she wasn't the only one. The entire staff felt it. Even the owner felt it. The mansion, once cold and silent, was now filled with voices, footsteps, warmth, and hope. But the real test was still ahead of them, and deep inside. The maid knew the most difficult part was yet to come. The day of the final inspection arrived, much sooner than anyone expected. The morning light spread softly across the mansion grounds, touching the freshly cleaned windows, the polished railings, and the garden paths that had been swept until not a single leaf was out of place. There was a quiet tension in the air, a kind of stillness that comes right before something important happens. The staff woke earlier than usual. No one had to be told to hurry or to stay focused. Everyone knew what was at stake. They moved through the mansion with practiced steps, checking small details again and again. Even those who usually felt shy or unimportant had become confident in their roles. The mansion had changed them. Just as they had changed the mansion, the maid stood near the entrance, adjusting the curtains so they fell just right. She wasn't nervous for herself. She was nervous for the place that had become her second home. She had seen what fear could do to people, and she had seen what hope could rebuild. She prayed, quietly in her heart, that today would not undo all the progress they had made. The owner came down the staircase wearing a simple suit. He did not look like a strict master today. He looked like a man who had learned how fragile things could be and how strong people could become when they stood together. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he paused for a moment and looked around. He saw the staff standing in different parts of the hall, waiting for his signal. He saw the new maid, her hands folded, her expression calm but determined. He felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. He nodded gently to her, and she nodded back. A car's engine hummed from outside the gates. Someone rushed to the window to look. "They're here," whispered one of the kitchen workers. No one spoke after that. They simply prepared themselves. The inspectors arrived, 3 people dressed in neat suits, holding clipboards and folders. They stepped out of the car with expressions that revealed nothing. Their eyes moved sharply, observing every corner before they even reached the door. The owner walked forward to greet them, his posture straight but not stiff. The staff lined up behind him quietly, showing unity without being told to do so. The inspection began. The inspectors walked through the main hall first. They commented on the age of the building, the height of the ceilings, the condition of the structure. Every whisper they exchanged made the staff hold their breath a little tighter. The owner kept a steady expression, but even he could not hide the tension in his eyes. They moved next to the dining room, the living room, the guest rooms, and the service areas. Some rooms, especially the older ones, still carried signs of wear that could not be erased in a few days. But the effort was visible. The air no longer felt heavy. The floors shone. The walls were clean. The furniture looked cared for, not neglected. The inspectors noticed all of it. When they reached the kitchen, the head cook offered them small samples of the dishes the staff had prepared. The inspectors accepted them politely, though their expressions remained hard to read. Still, the staff saw their eyes soften for a moment after tasting the food. It gave everyone a tiny spark of hope. The last part of the inspection took place in the garden. This was the area the staff had worked on the most. Weeds had been pulled, flowers replanted, paths repaired, and benches fixed. The garden looked peaceful, almost like a painting. The maid stood near one of the flower beds, holding a small gardening tool. She wasn't part of the display. She was simply doing what she always did, working quietly, making sure everything stayed in order. One of the inspectors approached her. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. "A few months," she answered softly. "And you enjoy it?" he asked casually. She looked at the flowers in front of her and smiled gently. "Yes, this place needed care. Everyone worked very hard. It has come a long way." The inspector studied her face for a moment. Her calm honesty made him pause. The inspection lasted almost 3 hours. When it finally ended, the inspectors returned to the main hall to speak privately among themselves. The owner and staff waited just outside the door. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the air felt still. The maid stood beside a window, her hands together. She didn't pace or fidget. She simply breathed slowly, trusting that whatever was meant to happen would happen. Finally, the inspectors came out. The owner took one step forward. "We have completed the evaluation," the lead inspector said. Everyone held their breath. "We have seen many old estates fall into disrepair," he continued. "But we have also seen what dedication can achieve." There was a long pause. The mansion shows significant improvement. The staff appears well organized. The environment is stable. And the potential value of this building remains high. Another pause. At last, he said the words they had all been waiting for. "We recommend that the mansion be preserved." The staff gasped softly. Some placed their hands over their mouths. Others looked at each other in disbelief. It felt like the weight of the entire world had been lifted off their shoulders. The owner closed his eyes for a moment, relief washing over him. When he opened them again, they shone with gratitude. The inspectors gave a few final instructions and left. The car drove away slowly, disappearing beyond the gates. The moment the car vanished, the staff erupted into soft cheers. They hugged each other, laughed, and even cried quietly. Some leaned against the walls, overwhelmed with relief. The maid remained still at first, simply watching everyone's joy. A small smile formed on her lips, soft, but full of meaning. The owner walked toward her. "You did this," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Everyone did this." He looked at her with a grateful expression. "But everyone followed you. You brought hope back into this place." She didn't know how to respond, so she simply bowed her head politely. Later that afternoon, staff gathered in the dining hall for a small celebration. Nothing grand, just a simple table filled with food, laughter, and relief. People shared stories about the last few days, joking about moments of panic and pride. Even the owner joined in, laughing softly at things he never would have noticed before. The maid sat quietly with a plate of food, listening to the conversations around her. She didn't need attention or praise. Just being part of this moment was enough, as the evening sun filtered through the windows. The owner stood up and tapped gently on his glass to get everyone's attention. "I want to say something," he began. The room fell silent. "I have made mistakes over the years," he said openly. "I pushed people away. I created fear. I watched this place fall apart instead of saving it. But now, thanks to all of you, this mansion has become a home again." He paused, looking around at the faces of his workers, and there is one person among us who showed me what true dedication looks like. The maid lowered her eyes immediately. Wishing she could shrink into her chair, she never asked for anything, he continued. She never complained. She worked with quiet strength, even when things were at their worst. She reminded all of us that kindness is more powerful than fear. The staff turned to look at her, their expressions full of warmth. "She saved this place," the owner said. The maid's heart trembled. She didn't know how to handle the attention, but she stood slowly, her voice soft and sincere. "I didn't save anything," she said. "We saved it together." The room erupted in gentle applause. That night, after the celebration ended and the staff went to rest, the maid walked through the quiet halls alone. She looked at the old paintings, the polished floors, the glowing lights. Everything felt different now. This mansion was no longer a place of fear. It was alive again. She stepped outside into the cool night air. The garden moved gently in the breeze, lit by the faint glow of the mansion's windows. She breathed in deeply, feeling peace settle inside her, for the first time in a long time. She felt proud not because of praise, but because she knew she had helped bring out the best in others. The owner stepped out quietly behind her. "Are you thinking about the future?" he asked. She turned to him and smiled softly. "A little," he nodded. "Whatever you choose to do next, this mansion will always be open to you." She looked back at the building, its tall silhouette against the night sky. "I think," she said gently, "I would like to stay. For now?" The owner smiled, relieved. "Then the mansion is truly complete," he said. The maid didn't reply. She didn't need to. The quiet night said everything. The mansion had been lost many times before, through neglect, fear, loneliness, and silence. But one determined worker had made the impossible. It's possible. She didn't do it with force. She did it with heart, and the mansion would never be the same again.